In a second-hand set of dimensions, on an astral plane that was never meant to fly, through wavering star mists, see the Grey Satuin. Drifting onwards through space, atop the shell of the world's turtle, are 4 giant elephants, upon whose broad shoulders rests the Discworld. Welcome to Dining Table Discworld. We're reading through the Discworld novels and discussing them at our dining table. Be aware there will be spoilers for the current book and others in the series.
Hello! Welcome to Dining Table Discworld. I'm Dave.
I'm Kathy.
And today we are talking about Reaper Man, which is the 11th book in the Discworld series. It was published in 1991. And what's the synopsis?
Grey-robed auditors decide that the Discworld Death has too much personality and force him into retirement. Death leaves his domain and gets work as a farmhand, going by the name Bill Dorr. His employer, Miss Flitworth, a subject of local gossip, is a respectable woman and compassionate despite her outsider status in the community. Wendell Poons, the oldest wizard, is due to die at the ripe old age of 130, but Death doesn't show up to his going-away party. Wendell remains confusedly animated, but discovers the opportunities of being undead, even as the unseen university faculty try various ways of dispatching him. Wendell eventually discovers the Fresh Start Club for the undead, run by eternal activist and zombie Red Shoe, and attended by vampires, a bogeyman, a wereman, and various others. Meanwhile, Ankh-Morpork is flooded by snow globes and inanimate objects moving about by themselves as life force builds up. After sharing his remaining time to save a little girl, Bill Dorr prepares to fight the new death, but his plans go awry, forcing him to improvise. Ankh-Morpork becomes overrun with trolleys, and Wendell Poons figures out they hatch from the snow globes and will turn to something more sinister, which will suck the life force from the city. Luckily, he has the help of his new undead community and some overexcited senior wizards.
Very excited wizards. They got to do magic. Lots of big magic.
So, what were your initial thoughts?
As we have mentioned many, many times before, I'm pretty certain this was the first Discworld novel I read. And I have read it a number of times, and pretty certain this was my copy, original copy that we've been reading. So yes, I thoroughly love this book. I think the death sequence is the one that I gravitate to the most, I think, with the books, from sort of my favourite highlight ones. So yes, it's got death, it's got the nature of reality, it's got wizards getting to throw big spells around, and you can tell they're really happy by that. So yes, all in all, I thoroughly enjoyed this book.
Cool. I think I only read it once. I think, again, I'm getting to the point where I don't really know what order I read things in, and I'm pretty sure I'd read stuff with like this faculty of wizards, and I'm pretty sure at least one thing that featured Red Shoe before I'd read this one. So again, for me, it felt a bit like this is where these characters are introduced, that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't obviously have such strong memories of it. So there's various bits and pieces I didn't remember and didn't necessarily know the order of them. But no, it was good. And there's lots of kind of quite interesting stuff in there. And also, yeah, various things that were fun and various things that were very poignant, which I guess we should probably get into. First thing I was going to say was about the sort of structure of the book. So there's these 3 main plot lines. 2 of them are quite closely linked, and one of them's a bit more of a B plot. So the main one with Death is a rural one. So he's had to leave his domain, he's gone into retirement, he's ended up in farming country, he sees the signs as help wanted, he goes and ends up being a farmhand for this woman called Miss Flitworth. She asks his name, and he doesn't know, and he gives what's obviously a fake name. I get the impression quite a few people do in that area. So then he becomes Bill Dorr, and there's a lot of stuff about how he's, doing the harvest because he's good with a scythe.
Yeah.
Lot of experience.
A lot of experience.
And then him kind of getting to know the locals and kind of becoming part of this community and figuring out how that works. And then also getting closer to his employer and the sort of infection building between them, and him also kind of understanding a lot of stuff about becoming human. So he starts having dreams and nightmares and experiences existential dread and stuff like that. And then eventually the new death turns up because it seems to be a bit of a gap to fill the vacancy. And he has a confrontation with it. Well, I don't want me to go through the later stuff, but sort of...
No, I'm going to say, there's a confrontation.
Yes, yeah. Then the other plot line is focused mostly on Wendell Poons and sort of the wizards and the Fresh Start Clubs. That's very urban. That's obviously an Ankh-Morpork. So Wendell Poons is supposed to die, He is apparently the first person that Death does not show up for because of the aforementioned gap in filling the vacancy. He ends up, his, I guess, ghost ends up kind of going back and possessing or driving his body. And then the wizards initially try and help him by dispatching him. And that's a bit more funny. And then Windle goes and he ends up meeting up with the Fresh Start Club, which is this group for the undead. Windle also ends up investigating the mystery of the snow globes and the odd things that are happening in the city, and him and the undead kind of coming together to deal with that, and also the wizards joining in as well. So yeah, I mean, each of these plot lines have something about community in them, or particularly like Windle with the Fresh Start Club and Bildor with the rural community. And I guess the wizards a little bit, that the faculty seem to be settling in with each other quite a bit.
The structure is interesting. The two plots that he's definitely dealing with, you know, he's got Death's story, he's got Windowpoons' story, and then you've got the wizards, which, let's be honest, are comic relief, really. They're doing stuff. They kind of blunder into Windowpoons' story later on after departing.
Yeah, I think it's mostly showing how the life force build-up is affecting things.
Most of the other books so far have been kind of focused on one story with bits of comic relief. I mean, I think in Mort, you definitely got Mort's story, with the Death bits being more comic relief. Weird Sisters.
Weird Sisters is a bit more separate.
It's a bit more, but
it's more ensemble as well.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the Witch's story, which, you know, is often, you know, follows one or all of the witches, but it's kind of, that's the one main story. And then the bits with Tom, John, the Fool and the Duke, kind of there just to fill in the gaps, but, you know, you're not following them as much.
No, I think there is a bit with that one, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's the first time we get multiple points of view, you know, stories throwing through, which I thought was interesting, you know. I don't think you could have done a whole book with just the Death aspect.
No, I was actually surprised how little that was. I seem to remember it better, but then when I was reading it, I thought, oh, this isn't actually taking up that much of the page count.
No, and I don't think the Death bit is interesting, but I think you kind of, he'd already visited it a bit in Mort. Yeah,
it does seem like a development of that.
This is coming back and looking at it again. So, the other thing, first appearance of the Auditors of reality, the people that make things happen.
They're not people.
Okay,
like,
they're
I think they would.
People.
Yeah, they would very much not wish to be described as people.
Entities that maintain reality.
They are kind of like floating grey robes that don't appear to have anything in them, and they talk and they don't have speech marks or anything.
They don't talk. You just know that's what they've said.
And if any of them uses a personal pronoun, like I, that shows they're developing personality, and then they immediately snap out of existence, and then another one appears, and they'll just say we. So it's kind of like this kind of hive-mindy.
I have to say, personalities must be a real problem for them, because lots of them disappear very quickly. You do run through quite a lot of them in the book.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you can't ever tell how many there are because, of course, they aren't differentiated anyway, which is kind of the point.
It just you do. It's like every time they appear, you lose at least one of them.
Yeah, it's kind of like the fact that they have to talk, because the whole thing is that they hate the personality of the Discworld Death, and that it's not rational and logical, and that he doesn't behave as they think he should, like he should be all business. So they don't like personality. And I think the idea that saying I indicates one is developing it, but it's almost like in talking about personality, you have to take on some of that.
Yeah, and then it's then poof in a burst of blue smoke.
Well, this thing, they hate pronouns more than almost anyone, which is impressive nowadays.
I was just going to say, I mean, wow, yes.
Well, they're fine we, but yes, anything singular, they're not into. So really, the originators of.
Yeah. We're not supposed to like them anyway, so that's not going to...
Yeah, they're clearly antagonists.
So really, it's really the Auditors of the driving force in this, and we often...
Well, they're the inciting incident,
yeah. We often run into them in Death books. The Auditors are the people that... People again. The entities that are kind of... that are Death's antagonists. They are the ones that are trying to...
Well, they're kind of just killjoys a bit, aren't they?
They are terribly killjoys.
And it does go more into what they think in other books as well, I think. I want to talk about Windle's new lease on life as a zombie.
Yep.
You know, there's memes you see. Oh, you're like Stardust powering a skeleton in a meat suit, like a ghost in a mech. Or, people finding novel ways of describing it, like being in a body. But that is kind of what Windle's doing, in that he dies and no one comes to collect him, and so he just goes back to where he knew before. But then he's inhabiting his body, but he's not, I guess he's attached to it, but he's piloting it. So he had, decades, maybe best part of a century of being in a wheelchair, of being mostly deaf, of not seeing very well, and probably like a century or so of just being in the unseen university, not really going anywhere. So he lived quite a sheltered life.
Except for when they went to the moving pictures.
Apart from that one time they went to moving pictures, in which he, I think, was the most objectionable geezer.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say he's a lot less objectionable in this version.
Death seems to make him more pleasant somehow.
Yeah.
Which sounds like a terrible indictment of him, but I think it's just he was in that kind of environment for a long time. And then when he dies, I think, A, it's a little bit humbling, but B, it also means he's inhabiting his body, but suddenly he can just, at one point he realises he's squinting out of habit, so he just makes his eyes sharper. And he has zombie strength, so he digs an underground tunnel with like a plank of his own coffin, and forces himself through, like all this earth.
To be fair, I'm quite impressed he manages to find his way from whichever crossroads the wizards buried him at back to the university was, because, I mean, that's quite impressive a feat, in my opinion.
Maybe being a zombie also makes you good at like navigating underground.
I mean, possibly.
He's doing better than Bugs Bunny.
True.
Didn't even get lost at Albuquerque.
No.
So you sort of have this kind of like new lease on life, or death, which he has. And it has some reflection on age. The idea that this guy's life had become so small and limited, which I think is often a problem with the fear that people have with growing older. Yeah. So I think it does make a comment on that. And then you've got the Fresh Start Club. So the wizards have tried various sort of humorous ways of trying to dispatch him. So they've tried garlic, and they've tried...
No, burying him at a crossroad, holding with a stake through the heart, but they couldn't find a stake, so it was a stalker's salary.
Yes, they've misunderstood that in two ways, haven't they?
Yes.
And the whole thing is Windle's kind of quite apologetic. It's like, oh, sorry, this is so much trouble. Thank you so much for helping. And they're like, oh, no, it's fine. Like, everyone's idea is, well, obviously you're supposed to be dead, so we'll just try and help you with that. And then I think he gets bored. And then he tries to drown himself in the river, but he just goes into the river, and then he's just at the bottom, and it's dark, and it's not very nice. So then he just walks out again.
Well, also, it's just something about the wizards attempting to help. It's very much a... And I think you will find this throughout the book and in some ways throughout the series. Sometimes they latch onto things, but only with part of the knowledge.
Yes.
And as wizards, I feel that they were not making best use of the large library that they had.
They never use that library.
Yeah. I mean, they could have just gone and asked, excuse me, do you have any books on how to re-dead and undead?
I mean, well, this is the thing, because technically they've got the Necrotelecomicon in there from the previous wizard book. Well, not just wizard book. But... They never use the library. Like, Windle goes and uses the library. It seems like he's probably not been there in a very long time. I think... Yeah. And then the librarian is a bit, as Reg would say, quite prejudiced, because he doesn't want to let him in because he's dead. And it's a bit like, well... But yeah, because Windle later actually goes and looks things up and researches things, but you don't feel like the wizard's doing that. And yeah, a lot of the wizard stuff is written very... It's very good comedy that Pratchett does, where somebody says one thing and somebody else gets... half but not all of the idea and latches onto that and goes off in a direction, and then suddenly it becomes something slightly different, and you can see how it's happened, but you never would have got from one point to the other. Like, you wouldn't have seen the connection if you hadn't read the whole thing, and you can see the misunderstandings happening. At one point, Windle thinks, Rid Cully never listens to anyone. And part of his leadership style is actually, if it takes more than 2 minutes to explain it to him, then it's clear. Like, if you give up after 2 minutes, it clearly wasn't that important. If you're willing to spend time to explain it to him, because he's just never listening. And then conversely, you've got Red Shoe of the Fresh Start Club. He's not listening, but that's because he's filled in your part of the conversation in his head already. So Red Shoe is a zombie, and also an activist.
Very much an activist.
Absolutely. And he works at the... the mortuary. And so he puts little cards in all the coffins along with some matches that says Fresh Start Club. And this is how Poons finds them, because he gets bored in his coffin and then he finds the matches and strikes it and sees the note and thought, okay, I'll go along to that. And it's just this little community, and it's very odd. You've got a wereman called Lupin, who is a werewolf at full moon, but is a wolf the rest of the time, so like a reverse werewolf. And you've got, I think there's like a ghoul, there's a bogeyman who's very shy, so always has to hide, I mean they hide anyway, but he always has to hide under a chair or behind a door. And Windle helps him out later by like giving him a really good door, so he's quite friendly.
Got a banshee.
There's a Banshee who always writes it down.
It's got a speech impediment, so always has to write down the wail. So there's various pieces people gets handed a piece of paper with just "ooh" on it.
Yes. It's also odd that it's a he, because Banshees, I believe, are technically female,
Yes.
but he's a bit more of a minor character. And then, there's Reg, who's always there, and he has paint, he'll write slogans on walls.
Reg does not...
Placards, everything's...
Has not seen a wall that he couldn't, write a decent, slogan on.
Yes.
He has a good line and slogans.
Yes, the local chalk-owning vegan has nothing on this guy.
Yes, exactly.
So Reg is always there like, your brothers and sisters rise up, and because everyone brother something and sister something. And I have, being in activist spaces, I have been in spaces where people have actually done stuff a bit like that, and you're like, all right, it's actually a real thing. But
Comrade! Not quite.
I'm just trying to think, somebody might have done, I don't recall. And then you've got the Wilkins, or the Count and Countess. So it's basically this very frumpy middle-aged couple, and he has inherited vampirism.
And bitten by a lawyer, he says.
Yeah, I think that might have been a joke on how much they charged him or something.
I don't know.
He seems to have some sort of inheritance from somebody who's clearly a vampire, but the castle and everything's fallen down into ruin. So he's discovered this heritage of his. And then his wife's gotten really, really into it. So she insists on talking like this and doing this very put-on kind of fakey Eastern European accent, the traditional vampire thing. And she insists they have to wear, like, formal dress all the time. And she's making him turn the basement into a crypt, because you have to have a crypt.
Yes.
So
but those marble prices.
Well, that's why he's having to do it himself. He can't afford the labour. So he's sort of saying, if you're lower middle class vampire, it's not very good. And he's sort of half had a feeling there might be young ladies in negligees. No, none of that. But she's very proud of her husband's heritage, and so she insists they have to be the Count and Countess. And their names is Wilkins, but she's calling him Wilkins, and so it's one of these things where somebody's partner's just got very, very into the whole identity thing, and he's probably faintly embarrassed. But this whole club exists because they know that Reg would just be heartbroken if they didn't turn up. So they're not really into the activism, but it's good for the community because they're all obviously slightly odd, slightly rubbish undead.
Yes. I think definitely just that edge of rubbish. I think not in a terrible way. It's just Banshee with a speech impediment. It's
it's
just these odd little things that make them
And again, I think Pratchett's thought about what's funny with this and then run with it a bit. Another character that turns up quite a bit in this and is a bit odd is Mrs. Cake. So Mrs. Cake is a medium, although most people say she's more of a small. She has precognition, so a lot of her dialogue's quite funny because she'll answer people's questions before they ask them. So all of the conversation is the wrong way around. So she's like, I'm going to turn my precog off, which freaks out various wizards.
Yeah.
And she has a daughter who has some sort of monthly issue, and basically her daughter Ludmilla is clearly a werewolf, but at this stage her mother's very embarrassed about it. But being a medium, Mrs. Cake has connection to ghosts and she can talk to spirits, and her spirit guy, there's a couple of things a bit problematic with Mrs. Cake. One is that she is described as being the terror of the Ankh-Morpork priesthoods, because what happens is she'll start attending a church or a temple or a mosque or some sort of place of worship. She'll kind of be really involved, take charge of all these committees and stuff, but then fall out with people. Everyone will be a bit annoyed with her, and then she'll leave and no one will know what to do anymore. And it's this very specific idea of, I guess, a certain kind of, again, lower middle class English woman.
Yeah.
The slight issue with this is because at various points she'll use the word heathen, and there's bits in other part of the book which kind of just all heathen, or again, it's the kind of whole all foreign thing. So it's very kind of little England.
Yeah.
But it's weird because the Discworld and Ankh-Morpork are polytheistic.
And they know gods exist.
Well, this is the thing, so it's a bit weird that, because Pratchett says, church, temple, mosque, but you're like, well, two of those are very specific religions I believe don't exist in the Discworld. Temple's obviously a bit more of a catch-all term, but why is she saying anything as heathen when most of those gods probably exist in Ankh-Morpork? It sounds like she's gone through most of the churches. And again, it's taking this very Christian and specifically very Anglican C of E, Church of England type thing, and just kind of sticking it in to the setting that has polytheisms. That feels a bit weird.
It's a bit strange. I mean, she's a fun character for when she's just kind of doing the precognitive conversation and as a way of connecting things. But I mean, the other problem with her obviously is her, I'm going to use air quotes here, spirit guide,
Yeah. This is
two-man bucket.
one-man bucket.
One-man bucket. Yeah, so yes, two.
This is the thing. I kept waiting for the joke because I remembered what the joke was, and it's much later in the book. So I thought, yeah.
But yes, one-man bucket is basically standing in the role of a classic Indian spirit guide.
Yeah, Native American.
Yes.
It's not great. I mean, I think there was quite a vein of this kind of thing in like 90s New Age stuff, now that I look back on it.
I think there are certain things that he could have got away with. Could have got away with it being a pseudo Native American spirit guide with the joke that he lived in Ankh-Morpork. He died in Ankh-Morpork. He's not really
it sort of says his great grandfather moved there because he talks about the plains and the buffalo, and she's a bit like, you're from here.
Yeah, but the problem, I think, what tips it over the edge is the alcoholism.
Yeah, that's very bad.
And that is a real problem that, for Native American communities
and depictions of
and it is the fact that yes, he died drunk, and in order to kind of reward him for doing giving information, Mrs. Cake sets fire to spirits, to whiskey and
spirit liquor
to send into the
spirit world.
Yeah, the whole
I don't think he actually makes that explicitly a joke, but now that I think about it, it's sort of there. Yeah,
and that's what.
Also, the thing with the name as well. So the joke is he's called One Man Bucket, and it's this whole idea of like, because the mother names you after the first thing she sees. And I don't want to do the whole joke, but again, I feel like I've heard that and other stuff. And again, it just, looking back on it, there was this very kind of new agey, but white people doing it, stuff related to Native American stuff that I think was around then. I certainly remember that kind of thing being mentioned when I was a kid, which I didn't question because I was a kid, and obviously we're in England, and those aren't communities that are well represented here.
No, but that one falls, and I think it's the only time we see One Man Bucket.
I think Mrs. Cake doesn't have as much of a role later, and she's got very different. She's quite different. I think after the events of this book, she takes on different aspects.
So yes, it's like the character is okay, but it kind of it really does.
You can see where the jokes are from, but some of them I think don't.
To a modern sensibility, they're not jokes we should be making. So yes, I mean the only thing I can say for the spirit. The setting fire to the whiskey is that it's the foreshadowing and the information about things that are destroyed existing in the spirit world.
At least briefly,
yeah. But
you make a ghost of something that's destroying it.
But you could have done that in other ways.
So, we want to talk about the new wizard faculty, because obviously this is their second outing.
Yes, literally for some of them, I'm sure. So yes, we originally saw these guys in moving pictures at the end. Windlepoons is a very different character. Windlepoons,
he's now the focus.
Was very much your old granddad who really didn't understand. He wasn't
really aware what was happening.
Yeah, he's a bit more with it now. But yes, you've got Ridcully back again. You've got the Bursar, the Dean,
the other ones who I don't remember. You've got
Reader of Recent Runes.
There's a lecturer and a wrangler and a reader, and I don't. Basically, to me, they're
Senior
all
wrangler.
Okay. They're all just like a load of berobed, pointy-hatted, bearded old guys. So I don't think I need to differentiate them. I know the Dean's kind of like the fat one, I guess.
I think there's elements that at the moment again they're kind of building kind of personalities
a bit. I mean, so I get the impression. I mean, there's a whole big dinners thing with wizards, so I don't know. Although I could see something maybe being a bit rangy, but I feel like that doesn't get mentioned so much. I think obviously Rick Curley is very much he's the leader, and there's his whole personality. The thing with the Bursar, it's not been made as explicit yet, but you can start to see him sort of like saying something a bit nervous still, but getting a bit excited. And they're like, okay, Bursar, okay. So I think we're not quite there yet, but clearly later the Bursar very much has a variety of mental health issues.
I think this book is where he supposedly starts developing them, because I think earlier on in the book he talks about it mentions about him kind of losing it a bit.
Maybe I didn't feel like that was as strong as in later books.
No, moving pictures. He's there to kind of. He's there for the signatures. He's the,
Yeah, he does seem to be trying to work and do things in moving pictures. But I think, I suppose the whole thing's the elephant pot, and like various things seem to make him very uncomfortable and get a bit upset. And it sort of seems like a continuation of that, but it's not a focus.
No.
It's just kind of on the edges of what's frankly a load of nonsense. I mean, basically, the wizards find that the life force that's building up, not that they know what it is, but screws are undoing themselves and things are floating up into the air. A set of clothes walks down the street on its own. All the screws come off their chandelier and it falls. And then their compost heaps start coming to life.
Yeah.
And we do see a fair bit of their dwarvish gardener, who's very proud of his roses and his compost heaps. He's mentioned quite a bit, and how exciting it is working at the university. It's all a bit silly, and like at one point they get summoned to the palace with a load of other civic leaders, including the priesthood, and then you kind of have there's this rivalry between the priesthood and the wizards, and they all shout at each other, they're all god botherers, and that they're messing with things that man should not. And then you discover that Ridcully and the head priest of the chief god, Blind Io, are actually brothers. So you've got them off at the side having a bit of a chat and sort of saying, oh, we know this isn't magic, oh, we know it's not any of the gods, what is it? And then having to kind of tell the wizards and the priests off like they're naughty schoolboys from different schools.
Basically, two rival schools, running into each other on a school trip, and the teachers just going, just catching up, and then
sharing a quick drink and
drinking a cigarette.
Yes. Yeah, so again, it's sort of all quite funny and stuff. And
I think we've got... They're not very defined characters. I mean, the dean...
I don't think they need to be.
The dean is the one, is going around shouting yo a lot, which I can't remember I think the whole reason...
It's because of the compost heap. So one of the compost heaps comes alive and becomes a kind of like weird compost heap monster that chases them. So they kind of barricade themselves in the Great Hall, manage to blast it with everything they've all got, probably a bit ad hoc, destroy it, get all worked up, oh yeah, let's take out the rest, get all worked up, and sort of like one of them's painting like, the like camouflage on his face, and then the dean starts saying yo all the time, and he says it throughout the whole book. And that was very weird, because my memory, and I suppose this did come out in 91, which I probably just about remember as a year, but my memory of that is that yo was a thing that people said, and I don't think it's a thing for a long time.
Much.
I feel like I remember it being on TV. I remember it being the kind of thing that, like, older people come on TV and are like, oh, well, what's this? So I don't know if it's very of its time and practice including it in a sort of, like, that cringy, oh, no, an old out-of-touch person is trying to use modern slang kind of way. But it's so far past that even being the slang that I don't quite know if that's what it was. It feels like it does feel quite 90s, like early 90s, though.
Here we go, I found it. Yes, when they've just taken out the other one. Archanter turned back to the dean. Yes, he said, it appears we were all mean. Yo, said the dean. Yo what, said Ridcully. It's not a yo what, it's just a yo, said the senior wrangler behind him. It's a general street greeting, an affirmative with conventional military in-group and masculine bonding ritual overtones. What, like jolly good, said Ridcully. So basically, they kind of misunderstand some language, kind of like your dad trying to use common, modern slang,
So are you saying your dad in general, or are you talking about my actual father?
I think general dad.
Okay, sure.
I mean,
I don't know if my dad listens to this, but he does like the Facebook post, so...
I'm just saying any dad, a general, not our specific.
Well, that would count you also, for you're also a dad.
Yes, and this is why I do not try and use, words that,
You have to wait till the kid's old enough to be embarrassed by it.
Yes, and then I would do it deliberately to embarrass him, but that's slightly different.
Sure. Yeah, then later the wizards get to actually use a lot of magic against the whole.
I think that's fun for them, because I get the impression.
Well, they got all worked up thinking they'd fight more compost heaps, and then only one of them came alive, so they're running out of stuff to do, and then the whole like trolleys and mall thing happened.
I think they just I think as you get further and further up the chain in things, you get to do less and less of the fun things,
which again was Wendell Poon's thing probably.
Yeah, and I think they just use an opportunity. It's like, I get to throw all this combat magic around, this magic that is blows things up, does a lot of damage. So yes, they're having fun just blowing up trolleys in waves and waves with combat magic that they're only just remembering, and it's fun.
Theoretically, there was not too long ago a thing where they could have used a lot of explosive blowing up magic, but obviously everyone was visiting their aunts during the events of sorcery.
Well, yes, exactly. So,
but in general, it does seem like the university is painted as very much a place that it's good to get out of.
During the Wizards bit, actually, you do kind of see a little bit more of the university. Mm-hmm. They talk about the high energy magic building.
It is mentioned briefly, isn't it? Yeah.
Which is basically somewhere that they built for the students, and they don't really understand what goes on in there.
It feels like it might be a bit like postdoc or something.
Yeah,
except it doesn't seem clear that they quite have that. Well, all the old levels and stuff seem to have gone away with sorcery, and they now have something where against kind of research, I guess.
Yeah. So, but we'll come back to more of the wizard stuff in later books.
Do you want to talk about some of the sort of death stuff
Yes,
now?
yes.
So, obviously, Bildor is the guy, and he's having to adjust to living amongst humans and actually having social skills, because before he saw, I say a lot of, all the humans, but he only visited them, and they're only brief conversations, kind of on his turf and his terms. And even in the events of more, yeah, he's, he goes to a party, he goes fishing, he gets a job, he works in a kitchen, but it's all just temporary. It's a holiday.
Yeah.
Whereas this is retirement. This is now his existence. And he's given a lifetime with sand in it. So there's all these things, like he starts dreaming and gets really freaked out by it. And he starts experiencing existential dread because he can see that sand's, going for his lifetime, which he's never had to experience before. But then there's also quite an interesting thing of he goes into the local village and goes to the pub. And because the thing is, he's still a 7-foot tall skeleton. And he still has that thing of people being a bit like, oh, Bildor, he's very skinny.
Yeah, so 7-foot tall skeleton, no longer in a robe, he's in dungarees and a straw hat.
Because he's a farmhand.
Yeah, but significantly different attire than.
Yes, and there's this interesting thing where he sort of realises, when he's playing darts, if he does it perfectly each time, everyone's a bit, or same with pool, everyone's a bit annoyed by that. So he starts making all sorts of comical mistakes, and no one notices. It's actually very difficult to get the ball to ricochet off 3 different things and land in somebody's glass. That takes a lot of skill. So he sort of becomes, before long, he's good old Bildor. And he's doing this and sort of realising, if he throws darts and goes behind him, oh, ha ha ha, but actually that takes a lot of skill. So he realises that being kind of bad at stuff, and also I think offering to buy people drinks and just, listen, makes him quite popular, but he doesn't understand it. And people quite often say stuff like, so they talk about Miss Flitworth, and there's all things like, oh, she's got boxes of gold up there, because she's a woman on her own. And so there is an element of suspicion to that. And then people say, oh, you've got your feet under the table there. And he knows there's more meaning to the words, but he does not understand what the euphemism or the implication is. And then the one person who can see him as he is a 5-year-old girl. And she's like, oh, it's a skeleton. He's like, no, child, no. And they're like, stop bothering Mr. Door. But in some respects, the child's quite refreshing because she's one of the few people who isn't using all this double talk he doesn't understand. And reading it now, it feels very... I guess it sounds like what a lot of kind of neurodiverse people have mentioned about, people not being straightforward in conversation, about there always being a lot of hidden meaning, and some people just having difficulty with that, and maybe with how body language works or subtleties. And I mean, there's always that when you're coming into a group or a culture you don't really know that well. But I know it just sort of felt a bit like he's kind of having to pretend to be a regular human without actually the background of that. And again, I wonder if it's some masking where people are trying to fit in the neurotypical world, but that doesn't actually fit with them very well. But then children are quite refreshing because they're just honest.
Yeah. I could see that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's what Pratchett was intending, but it struck me.
I think it's a accidental byproduct of him having this very literal character, which I think is the thing, It's
and I suppose there's quite a bit of that kind of fish out of water, somebody encountering, human society for the first time. It's a bit of a general theme, isn't it? But yeah, I thought that was quite interesting. And then, the thing with the scythe. So...
Yes, so he's obviously he knows he's going to have to he will face death. We knew death when he dies. So he decides he's going to fight. This is after he's saved the girl
Sal
from a fire, and she's kind of linked to him now.
He's sharing his life with her.
So yeah,
and also his landlady or employer. She finds out who he is. Yeah. And isn't as freaked out as you think, but it says, she's 85. It's like a depressed skeleton wasn't the worst thing she'd seen.
No.
And yeah, she realises who he is, and so then she helps him as well. Well, because this is the thing, because originally he wasn't going to save the little girl. Little girl's in the fire, everyone's standing around looking, and Miss Flitworth, despite everyone always gossiping about her, is like, no, we have to get buckets, she tries to organise it, she tries to get somebody to climb a ladder, but at that point it's too hot, and everything's burning.
Because it was in a pub, so the spirits were adding to the temperature.
And at first, in Moda's death, he says to her, meddling with the fate of one individual could destroy the world, and she slaps him and says, which hurts her a hell of a lot because he's a skeleton. and says, "You don't live or work with me anymore."
Yeah.
And then he saves the little girl, so then he's kind of like a hero. But yeah, they're kind of sharing. She's on borrowed time, and he's sort of sharing time with her. So then that's when Miss Flitworth helps, and kind of she's on his side. But yeah, he knows the new death will come. He's going to fight, which is funny because he's seen people try and do that before and knows it doesn't work with him. But this is somebody else.
Well, also, I think he knows kind of knows the rules better. I think because he knows about objects. Death of an object can exist in ghost of an object.
So there's a whole sequence that's kind of like the forging of a mythical weapon. So he takes a scythe and he sharpens it and sharpens it, and he sharpens it on silk, and he sharpens it on a spider's web, and then he sharpens it on sunlight. Like literally the dawn is coming, because Discworld light is obviously slow and moves in a liquidy sort of manner. And he sharpens it on that, and then it's so sharp that whenever it's nearby and somebody's talking, the words are like cut.
Yeah.
Interesting typography.
Yeah, so this is mimicking the scythe of death, the really, really sharp scythe.
And so it's this whole kind of like, it feels very mythic, it's very kind of magical. But then he takes this to the blacksmith and says to the blacksmith, "Kill this." And the blacksmith, who's this very forward-thinking young man who's very into kind of science and engineering, not that's quite called that, and has come up with the combination harvester that is pulled with a horse, but you won't need farm hands anymore because it does all the stuff, it's got all this machinery to it. And he's a bit like, that's a weird way of putting it. And he sort of goes, he means destroy it utterly, but then later he kind of doesn't, because it's very impressive, and he leaves it. And so Death was supposed to make this weapon that once it's killed will have a ghost, and then he can take it.
So when he dies, or at least he steps into the spirit world, he can wield it and defend himself.
But then the blacksmith doesn't do it, and so that whole sequence is completely undercut because it's not there, and he just has to use a regular scythe and some of his smarts.
Well, I don't think it's not so much smarts. So in the confrontation with this new death, our death.
Bill Dorr. Because he's Bill Dorr at that point.
Is kind of gets a bit annoyed because a storm comes.
And it has to be midnight.
Yeah, and the new death keeps appearing silhouetted by lightning on hills.
And Death keeps saying drama.
Yeah, and he knows that he won't come for him until midnight because it's all about the drama, which is I think he's just getting a bit exhausted with. And so in this final confrontation...
he's very angry that he has a crown as well.
Exactly.
He's like, I never wore a crown.
The new death pulls his cowl down to reveal not a face or a
skull.
Just smoke with a crown. And, this enrages him, so Bill Dorr, because, and he says, I didn't wear a crown. And the new death says, but you didn't want to rule. And the idea that this new death wants to take the old death, and it's like...
Yeah, well, this is the thing, because he says something about, like, do you think this is a game? And he's like, game. And for a moment, Death's like... Because people have challenged him to all sorts of games over the years. Yes. And he's a bit like, do you know Cripple Mr. Onion? Which is obviously one of the Discworld games. The other thing that just reminded me of, actually, is earlier in the book, Miss Flitworth gets him to put out rat poison and also kill a chicken, and he's there feeling like a murderer because this thing, he's never actually killed anything, he just takes them after they die, and that's how he meets he puts down the rat poison, feels like a murderer, and then what happens is, in his absence, lots of other deaths have appeared. So you've got the sound of chopping, which is the death of trees, and you've got a sort of shadow under the water that's the death of mayflies, and then you have the death of rats, which is basically a little skeletal rat with a tiny cowl and tiny scythe.
So cute.
Which obviously kills the rats on the barn that he'd poisoned earlier. So he does briefly interact with that new death, but it's the human death that's kind of the problem, and obviously it's putting the anthro and anthropomorphic personification.
So he's kind of, this new death feels that taking the old death is like taking billions of lesser lives.
Lesser as well, that's not nice, is it?
It's very much this. Yeah, it is not the kind of...
Well, there's a sort of mirroring of the harvestman and the combine harvester, isn't there? Because obviously the blacksmith, Ned Simnel, has made this combine harvester, It's got all, it's obviously gears and cogs and I don't know, all sorts of stuff.
3x grip play.
Sure. And he's trying to explain it and no one understands. And then he's taken it to a field and has a horse on it, although he says at some point we might be able to do it without a horse. And all the people, which includes a lot of farming people and farmhands, are watching, ready to jeer it. But it actually does okay. But then later...
Well, they have a race between the Bill Dorr and the Combine Harvester, in which Bill Dorr does pretty good, considering he is cutting every single stalk singularly.
But real fast.
Really, really fast.
Does he still have his time trick, like when he worked at Harger's house with ribs?
I mean, I presume there must have been something. So yeah.
But then later with Death and, like, New Death.
I suppose it's like one does the job. The Combine Harvester and they do the job, but there's something lacking from it.
Well,
he does later on when he's confronting Azrael, the death
what I
of
think
the
is
universe.
it's kind of like an employment tribunal, but with the death of the universe and all the auditors.
So kind of saying, what does the harvest care for?
What can the harvest hope for except for the care of the Reaper Man?
The idea that you kind of have to have a little bit of a personal touch.
Yeah, and there's also the fact that when he dispatches the New Death, then the Combine Harvester comes to life, kind of thing, and comes after him.
I think that's the idea. That's the auditors taking the matters into their own hands.
But that's where I'm saying he used a bit of improvisation and thought, because he took the tarp off the Combine Harvester
during the storm to
save the harvest. But he also took part of the Combine Harvester out. Yeah, he takes a piece out. So that's why I meant he improvised and used a bit of smarts, because he actually disarmed it.
Yes. But yes, he manages to dispatch the other death basically through kind of rage and kind of annoyance at the fact that it was just so...
Yeah, that bit felt a little bit confusing, because there's also the thing, like, the little girl's fine, but it's not really clear why or how. But
yeah.
But there we go. I mean, it was very dramatic and there's a lot happening.
I mean, there's a lot of drama. Definitely drama.
Various points were made. So just going back to Ankh-Morpork, basically a load of part of the life force thing, all these snow globes appear and they're everywhere, and like Dibbler sells off tons of them because they appear in one of his sheds first of all, and they're everywhere. And then trolleys start appearing, and Windlepoons realises that the trolleys have hatched from it. Bear in mind, they don't have trolleys on Discworld, so they keep saying, oh, it's like a metal basket on wheels, but they're really useful, so people put loads of stuff in them, and they're just everywhere. And then they all start fleeing the city, and there's this weird music that all the living humans, and I guess also dwarfs and trolls, that are not mentioned as much, start following, but all the undead are like, that's really annoying, we don't like it. This one, Wendell goes to the library and actually researches it and reads all this stuff about, like, cities being destroyed and dying, and he starts thinking about the animal kingdom and kind of predators and parasites, and I think parasitic wasps are mentioned, though maybe not in exactly those terms. And it's sort of this idea that you've got something, if something's like a predator or a parasite in the city, so it lays its eggs and then it has a larval form, but it's inside the host. And he's like, but what would be the life of a city? And he realizes, oh, it's the people.
Yeah.
And then he has this idea of, like, reefs circled by destructive starfish. Because what the trolleys, when they all pile together, turn into is, it's not quite finished yet, but it's clearly an American-style shopping mall.
Yes.
And it kind of made me think it was perhaps making a comment on how out-of-town shopping centres and retail parks, encircling a town, are said to destroy the local economy, the whole death of the high street.
Yeah. Which
obviously people have been talking about, I guess, as long as I've been alive, and obviously quite a lot recently with the pandemic. The idea that people go out of town to buy things rather than buy things locally, and again, them being kind of all around the edge of a town. So I think there's kind of like a sort of urban planning kind of comment in there. And again, quite what the death of the high street would look like. Is it that?
Well,
well, I guess that's what kills it. That's not the thing that takes it.
No, but still, it's trying.
Yes. We did research to kind of figure this out, and then him and the fresh starters, see something's weird and go to help out, and the wizards have sort of gotten in, because they're attacking trolleys, they've gotten inside and they're all co-opted, and they're kind of like security, one of them's like a clown or a juggler, which again, is that quite an American thing? I think
the idea is, I think in these malls you have entertainers,
Okay, I think that's a thing here, is it? I think it's a thing in America. I mean, again, it's 91, and that's a point when I do remember a lot of adults being very particular, like, oh, that's an American thing. Like, now I think like a lot of Americanisms are just here. Yeah. Like, we'll say movies and films, we'll just say it. But I do remember for a while, no, films is the right one. And, and adults being like, well, that's very American. I feel like malls, as opposed to shopping centres or retail parks, are more of an American thing, and that seems to be kind of what this is like. I think it's US style. I've only been to one mall in the US in my life.
I mean, you think retail parks are much more of that kind of big open area with individual things around a car park.
Oh, when you say open area, it's a car park.
Yeah, car park.
Whereas the mall is kind of like a car park surround. I mean, there's no car parks in this because there aren't cars, but there's a car park surrounding
a huge building.
A huge building,
which has got everything inside, which is closer to our sort of shopping centres.
That still sounds better without the cars, though. But that's a whole different conversation. It's interesting because it's obviously still growing and forming. Like, it's a bit unformed when they go inside. And inside there are trolleys that are acting kind of like worker ants, and some like soldier ants to try and attack them. And they're like, oh, what's the queen? And they realise they're inside it. But then they mention the shops, and they say inside the shops are... It's all described as kind of being glittery and sparkly, but also quite formless. Like, it hasn't quite decided what the shop's going to be. And it just made me think of AI art.
Yeah.
It's like, this is something, but if you look at it, you can't figure out the detail of what it even is. It gives an impression.
Yes. Obviously, Terry Pratchett ahead of his time on this one.
Well, I think it's just the way it's described.
Yes, but
that's what made me think of what's around now.
It is, I think if it's one of those, if you asked an AI generated thing to make a picture of a shop, it would be this kind of thing. You'd go, there's definitely stuff it is selling in there.
There's definitely products.
But I can't tell what it is.
But what are they?
But it's definitely shiny and I want to buy it, kind of.
So, and then, yes, the whole thing with the Fresh Start Club kind of club together to destroy the mall, which gets a bit kind of tentacly and gribbly.
Very tentacly and gribbly towards the end, which does get blown up by three very large spells that the Dean ties together and lobs in as a grenade very happily.
Yes, and then nicely at the end, everyone kind of has a party together, and then. Bless him. Oh, and then, they're saved by that bogeyman because Wendell really helped out and didn't know who's big and can save them because he always hid. And then at the end, you've got the undead and the wizards all having a party and chatting together, which is nice. So obviously at the start of the book, they're like, oh, Wendell's undead, we must deal with it, So maybe a little bit of prejudice overcome. But then Wendell kind of realises, and he says the Captain Oates line of like, I'm going outside, I may be some time. And I don't know how well known that is, like now or outside the UK, but when we talk Scott of the Antarctic, you'll be like, oh no. So Wendell gets his death, and then because regular death of Discworld is back.
Yes.
He goes to Azrael, which is basically, I think the heat death of the universe. It's the death over all deaths. I think the death of rats is a part of Discworld death, in the same way that Discworld death is a part of Azrael, but on a different scale. So he's enormous and the entire sky, and there's a massive clock that's all of time. And then the auditors are all around because they're thinking, ha ha ha. But with all of that, I think it's kind of an employment tribunal. Yeah. It's a bit like, can I have my job back?
I may have offed the replacement, but can I have my job back?
Well, they are all deaf.
Yes.
But then at the end, it's Chaz Def going around the Discworld, buying flowers, buying jewellery, buying chocolates.
Well, first of all, he goes back to his home and reads a bunch of the biographies of the Discworld's greatest romances to get an idea.
Much like his daughter used to do.
Yeah, to get an idea of what
human courtship is. Or
I don't think he's trying to court. I think he wants to give Miss Flitworth a taste of.
I don't think it's a romance between them. I think it's affection.
Because part of the story is that she was supposed to be married, but the day before her wedding, her fiance, who was a smuggler, went on a trip and never returned.
Yeah, I get the impression there are a lot of smugglers in that area. But
so I think in some respects it was like
she's had quite a sad life because she just lived with her father and then he died. Then she's on her own.
I think as a thank you, it's like I want to give you a some romance, some.
So a nice night out.
Yeah, but I don't know what I'm doing.
Because
so he does what the wizard should have done and does some research. Perhaps missing the point on a few things, but he at least tries.
At some point, someone tells him diamonds are a girl's best friends. He goes to the jewellers and goes, which is the friendliest of these? They're like carrot, cut, colour. Friendliness isn't on there. Like, and he ends up stealing a giant diamond from a temple in a place that's sort of a vaguely riff on Indiana Jones type stuff.
Yes.
But then he shows up at Miss Flitworth's store. Oh, you gave me a start, she said. And then this thing, the Harvest Festival. So I remembered this bit before it happened earlier. It's the Harvest Festival. The locals are all, the band's playing, and so they go down together. And then they just dance the entire night, and the band keeps playing, and like, even when they want to stop, suddenly, money's being thrown at them, so they keep going, and they dance all night, and she's saying, oh, she feels wonderful, she's never felt this young, she's, feels like she used to, and then...
Yes, and then it's obvious.
And then she's like, wait, when did it happen? When you said I gave you a bit of a start, I also gave you a bit of a stop. Because she's 85 and he shocked her and...
Well, also, she earlier on, while Death was... Bill Dorr was fighting the new Death, she gave some of her life essence, the lifetimer, to him.
Oh, yeah.
To try and to basically help him. So, obviously, lost a lot of bit there. So, yeah, I think it's just a nice...
It's nice, because, it's not... Yeah, you're right, it's not quite romantic, although it has the trappings of romance, but I wonder if that's just because all the source material he had suggested that's how things are between men and women.
And, I mean, yeah, and again, he was going there to kind of take her away to wherever she wanted, and all she really wanted was to go dance,
At the local,
and that was, and he acknowledged that as that's what you want to do, then this is what we're going to do, and I'm going to make it the best night,
except that it turned out she died before he started, but she didn't know that.
Well, wouldn't have been able to dance quite as long if she'd been alive.
No.
And I think it's a nice end, and and at the end they go off on Binky and do time travel stuff, because why not? And so he drops her spirit off at the place that her fiancé died.
Yes, because she never knew quite what happened and thought he was somewhere dangerous. It must have been that, but had he run off? But it does seem like he actually did get caught in like a mountain pass or something and died.
So that they both move on together.
Yeah.
Which is a nice,
The thing with Wendell Poon's bit was also quite... So it's sort of like... There's this idea of almost having a good death, having like passing well.
Yeah.
Although... I mean, in Wendell Poon's case, he knows that's what's happening, but he kind of wants it now. And with her, she didn't know it was happening, but it was a nice time. But I don't know, it just feels... I mean, obviously, there was stuff earlier with existential dread that Death was feeling for the first time. But it feels like even now there's some stuff around that, which obviously becomes such a thing later, considering, what happened with Sateri.
Yeah.
So, and the stuff he was campaigning for, later on in his life. I think that almost feel like an extra kind of weight to it a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But yes. So I think that's the main sort of like plot and character stuff we're going to talk about. There is a few things I want to just mention, because we're now at a point, which I think we mentioned with moving pictures before, there's a lot of things, there's more referring back.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of things you can see, which I think is a nice thing about reading them in order.
Yes, you get to see things, yeah.
You get to see where things come from a bit. So, the Amazing Morrison's Educated Rodents.
They are mentioned a couple of times.
And actually, is that like someone just says the book title? Like, that's a later book. But it's this idea of, it's like a con man who, went to Ankh-Morpork and fleeced the patrician and then went to some other cities as well, and it was all a scam. Castanunder gets mentioned in a footnote.
Oh, of course, because of one of the famous Discworld lovers.
Discworld's second greatest lover, which, again, will be expanded upon later. It mentions Forex.
Yes.
As where the wizards have corks around their hats and they go surfing. Some of it's precursor to some of the undead characters later, and obviously Red Shoe appears later. But I sort of wonder, there's stuff about werewolves, which I wonder if that kind of ties into Angkor later. Because one thing we didn't mention is that what Wendell Poons does do, and this is mentioned sort of just before he actually dies, is he sees Mrs. Cake's daughter, Lord Miller, who's kind of like hiding the fact she's a werewolf. And then he sees Lupin, who's a werewolf. And it's kind of like 1 week of the year, they're both wolf people. And the other time she's a human, he's a wolf or a dog. And he kind of sets it up so they can be together, which is sort of, again, it's sort of hinted that that's what happens. I think it says something with Wendell about like, nobody's truly God until all the plants they've gone have been harvested, all the words they've written are gone, and Wendell's legacy will be, these two people running through under the full moon, which again I think gets picked up on later as a big thing in Pratchett fandoms. The other thing is the beginning and the end of the book mention the Morris. Because the very first bit, it's not somebody dying and it's not the turtle going through space. I think we start that. The first bit's about the Morris dance, and I'm like, oh, okay, and it didn't really come up. It's just like the other Morris. And I feel like that's something he then goes back to later. Like, I remember there was dancing, I thought, is there a Morris dance? And it's not that at all. So I think, again, that's something he does explore later. But we've seen this before, like with the inspiration particles, they start as a footnote and then they come into the main text. So I think Pratchett, he's always coming up with ideas, and obviously he's so good at like pulling things together and building on stuff across his writing career.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to this one. As I think as we go on, there'll be more and more. This is definitely kind of like more colouring in bits of the existing world to flesh it out.
And also taking on some fairly weighty scenes. Like, it doesn't feel like he's specifically riffing on much.
No, I think it is kind of a look at life, death, community. We've got the rural community, the community that you make yourself of like-minded, or at least.
And then the people who are just all in the same place, but
the wizards are still a community. Final thoughts: go read Reaper Man.
You don't have to have read more to read this one, do you think? I don't know that you do.
I think it riffs off the same things. I think if you're reading these, so often a lot of people will read the series, the sub-series in sequence. I think if you've read Mort and go straight into this one, it will feel repetitive.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because you're riffing on the same sort of ideas a little bit.
Yeah, the only specific thing I can think of that is, briefly mentions Albert, but you don't really specifically have to know who Albert is.
That's just a...
Because I thought he was in this more, but I think I'm thinking of a later death book.
No, he's just as a...
He's just briefly there, and that's it.
No, I think it's nice to have read it, and then if you're doing the whole, like we're doing, it kind of gives some interesting additional views on death as a person. But yes, it's not required reading. No. And I'd definitely say if you're going to do it in a sequence, it's possibly a little bit of repetitive. I think it's more interesting than Mort, because obviously in Mort it's more of a playing for laughs, the idea of death, trying to find fun and enjoyment, and
or just being around humans that much.
While this is more about the themes of sort of your last days, or what, that sort of thing. But I think Mort obviously sets up a lot of the death stuff we get later
in the series. Yeah, that's fair enough.
So I'd say you don't have to have, but I think for the whole death sequence, Mort is important.
Okay.
So, with that, thank you very much for listening.
Yes, thank you.
We will be back next time for another Witches book. We're going Witches Abroad. You see, I think we're hitting some of the highlights straight off here. I think sort of the next quadrant has quite a lot of
good stuff in there.
Yeah, I think definitely some high points. We'll see about others later. But I think Witches Abroad. We get another solid Witches book. Looking at the list, we get Witches quite quickly. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. We'll see you all again next time.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to Dining Table Discworld. You can find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Dining Table Discworld. You can also find us on BlueSky at dtdiscworld. All our other contact information and credits for our music can be found in our show notes. Thank you for listening again, and we'll see you in our next episode.